What happens when you stop trying to sound like a writer and instead focus on sounding like yourself? What if writing is less about craft and technical precision and more about courage? The courage to be yourself. In many ways, I believe that Jack Kerouac's famous stream of consciousness style stems directly from these core ideas of trying to get away from the super academic or overly intellectualized version of writing that a lot of times we think, especially when we're going through, university educational programs, creative writing MFAs, these types of things. Kerouac's prose was antithetical to these ideas, and through this, he was able to create one of the most revolutionary styles of the last 100 years. But that begs the question, what is stream of consciousness, and how can we do it? Hey everybody, my name is Nicholas Corcel, and you're watching The Literary Nomad. Today, we are going to be breaking down Jack Kerouac's stream of consciousness prose and looking at a few ways that we can begin incorporating elements of it into our own writing. In the simplest of terms, stream of consciousness writing is writing that doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't stop, it just flows straight through the story. Kerouac described this himself as writing with no pause to think of proper word, but the infantile pileup of scatological build-up words till satisfaction is gained. And if you look at that sentence alone, you could start to see some quote-unquote issues in the prose, some things that maybe like a Grammarly or spell check or something like that might pick up on as being incorrect. Kerouac's writing is littered with these things, and in many ways, that's the point of it. He writes the first word that comes to his mind with very minimal editing. Of course, he would look back at his work and edit it in some ways, but he would write the first idea with the belief and the assumption that the first is often the best idea that comes to your mind, right? So he's talking about this scatological pileup of words, right? This invokes very evocative, if not unusual imagery that if you sit down too long, you could easily talk yourself out of phrasing it like this. But in the stream of consciousness style, he stuck with it because that was his first idea. That was the truest thought that he had when writing it. And so in this, the easiest way to think about it is that it's a train, right? It's a train that is pushing down the track, and it's not going to stop for grammar, coherence, or any of the typical forms that we learn in class. Instead, it is relentless in its pursuit of one thing and one thing only: truth. The goal here is not to narrate a story, but rather get at the core essence of what it means to be human. You're digging deep into your mind and giving the reader the most accurate representation of what you and your characters are thinking at the time. And kind of going off of that, a lot of times these stream of consciousness stories do feel more introspective. They do feel like an extension of the writer themselves. It's pretty hard, in my opinion, to write a stream of consciousness story from the point of view of a character that is not yourselves. And I think that is the reason why a lot of times in the work of Kerouac and other popular stream of consciousness writers, we feel like these characters are just extensions of the writer themselves. And we see this style in many of the modernist masters. We have William Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, even James Joyce and Liu Yichang in Hong Kong. They all use this stream of consciousness style in varying different ways, but the core goal was always to get into the mind frame of these everyday, regular people that made up the characters of their book. But in my heavily biased French-Canadian mind, I believe that Kerouac is the best example of this. You could make a great argument for the others, especially Joyce, but I think that Joyce does so many different stylistic things at once that I don't think it'd be overly useful to talk about him strictly siloed through the lens of stream of consciousness. Instead, you could honestly, and maybe we will one day, do a whole course on the unique style of James Joyce, culminating in his masterwork or complete mess of Finnegan's Wake. But today we're going to really just hone in on Kerouac, how he used this stream of consciousness style, and how you can begin to do it yourself in your own writing. It is important to note, however, that Kerouac did not often refer to his style as stream of consciousness. Instead, he preferred to call it spontaneous prose, and he wrote with the idea of mirroring the jazz music that he loved and was incredibly popular at the time that he was writing some of his most famous works. And with this in mind, really think about his prose and listen to it. And it's important that I said listen to it, not read it, because his goal is to make the prose sing, to make music with these words. And so I'm going to read you a passage, one of his most famous passages, and perhaps not the absolute greatest example of the stream of consciousness style, but it's a very recognizable passage that does employ the style in a really interesting, yet perhaps more importantly, easy way to understand. And so here's the passage. Kerouac writes, "The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars." And the way that he writes this sentence, he uses unusual commas. He omits commas sometimes, his repetition of burn, burn, burn. It might be something that a creative writing teacher in an undergraduate or even an MFA class might mark you down for. He utilizes this in a way to push you through the passage, through the story, through whatever he's trying to say. You know, a lot of times Kerouac does, it feels like you just jumped onto a train track, you grabbed onto this train, and you're being pushed through these beautiful American and Mexican landscapes that he so commonly writes about. And you're just holding on for dear life as this prose is washing over you and singing and filling your ears. That is stream of consciousness or spontaneity prose in its ultimate form, in my opinion. It's an expression of feeling, of emotion, of intensity and vigor that you can't get in this super removed intellectual style where you're like looking down and explaining everything in great detail. And I do believe that there is great value in that type of prose, you know, thinking about something like Dostoevsky and the way that he writes. But for me, there's nothing more interesting than this, you know, insertion into the mind, but with vigor and vitality, and it feels almost antithetical to academia. You know, you're feeling like you are in this. You know, it makes reading and it makes writing fun and joyous in the way that jazz is, rather than something that, you know, a bunch of rich upper class people are doing sitting around their cottage in Europe. And so when we think, why is this important? Really, quite simply, it just helps us turn off that inner critic in our mind. It makes it where we don't have to feel the pressure to sound so academic. We don't have to adhere to some of these styles that are more popular, you know, with the romantics and these types of writers. We don't have to do that. Not saying that that is bad. This is just an alternative style that might help you mine some new emotions out of your writing. Maybe you can adapt a short story or some sort of piece that you're working on and get a new revelation out of it. This style might be something that really resonates with you and your writing style and the emotions that you're trying to convey. The simplest way that I saw this described was that this is writing as thinking, not writing about thinking. And I think that that's a really interesting way to think about it, for, you know, lack of the desire to say the word think 1,000 times in a sentence. But I think it's true. I think that using the tool of writing as a way to get into what we think and how we think, rather than you're intellectualizing it and you're thinking about how can I make this sentence perfect. You're making it true. You're making it authentic. And this is a similar idea to what Hemingway got at with his, you know, capital T truth that he desired to get at through his many short stories. And so what are some rules? You know, I don't like to add a lot of rules with writing, and particularly writing exercises, but they can be useful sometimes. So a few simple things to think about before we go into the exercise. Don't stop. Force yourself forward. Remember, you're grabbing on the train. You make a mistake, it's past you. The train is moving on. You must move on as well. Don't erase or edit. At the end, you can polish up a couple things if you must, but I would really encourage you to not edit anything as you're working on this. You know, don't worry about your spelling. Don't worry about grammar. All of that can be fixed later. That's the type of editing that I would encourage. You know, you spell a word wrong, fine, change it later. But don't make huge systemic changes to the paragraph. And finally, don't judge your thoughts as they bounce from one to another. If you end up in a weird place, you know, if you take a hard left, that's fine. That's how the track was supposed to be. You just couldn't see it. You know, follow that track to wherever it takes you. Allow yourself that freedom to explore and to be surprised by your own writing. So now let's do some practice. And how I would recommend that you do this is you pause the video in a few seconds and you go find some jazz or some sort of music that you resonate with. For me, it can't have any like spoken lyrics in it, especially not in English. But for you, if that works, fine. Put some ambient music on, set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes, depending on whatever stamina you think you might have, and just write. And then we will talk a little bit about what we can do moving forward. I'll count you down from 3 and then start your writing. 3, 2, 1, and write. All right, welcome back. Hopefully it's been 5 or 10 minutes for you. And now you should have a paragraph. It might be amazing, it might be terrible, and most likely it's somewhere in between. And what we're going to do now is just look at it and, you know, revel in the fact that you have just completed a new writing style. I doubt that this will be very fantastic the first time that you've done it, but hopefully there will be moments of, oh, wow, that's unexpected. That's not something that I normally would have written. If that is the case, I really want you to identify those moments. And when you're struggling with getting somewhere exciting or getting somewhere new or even just arriving at whatever the point is in your writing, to maybe think about employing this stream of consciousness or a spontaneous prose style. Also, I would encourage you to continue this writing habit and use this style whenever you feel like it makes sense. And in the comments below, if you're feeling comfortable, which I would encourage everybody to, you know, there's no judgment here about the quality of writing. It's a 5 to 10 minute exercise. Leave a couple lines that you really like or a couple lines that you found surprising from this work that we've just completed. Drop them below. Don't provide a lot of context. Just let's let the writing speak for itself, and let's ideally create a little bit of a environment where we can discuss our work and enjoy and encourage each other as we approach and learn these new styles. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Nicholas Corsell, and this is The Literary Nomad, where you're going to constantly see me posting new videos of book reviews, writing advice, and even some film adaptation reviews, things like that. But without further ado, that's all we have for today. I will see you in the next one.